So hello there. I'm going to put this phone right here. And your name is Brian.
My name's Brian.
You're from Colorado, or you live there right now.
Mm-hmm.
And there you experienced a really interesting job, namely wilderness therapy. For how long did you do that for?
I was in wilderness therapy for almost 4 years.
Okay.
So just a couple months shy of 4 years, yeah.
And you actually facilitated the retreats out into the wilderness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
you were there.
Guide, yeah. Yes.
As a leader?
Yeah, there's a process. So when I initially started, I was just went through training. So I had the initial training, and then I had an apprenticeship for 3 shifts, which they were like evaluating my abilities as a guide and whether or not I would be a fit for the program. Mm-hmm. And this was on like the guides that lead the trips are called the senior guides. And so the senior guides are evaluating the newer guides. And then eventually I would work my way out of there. So when I was an apprentice, I couldn't be alone with students. And there were a couple things I couldn't do. Like I couldn't tag into a student if they were on a high safety watch.
What do you mean by tag a student?
I mean that some of the students that come in are like actively suicidal. Mm-hmm. Like they don't trust themselves, mm-hmm. whether or not. So being tagged is like I am within arm's reach of them at all times. Mm-hmm. Like a student is in arm's reach of a guide at all times, like for physical safety.
If they are at that level of suicide ideation.
Yes, and that's determined by their therapist in the group, or it's determined by the therapist. Like there's like an intake therapist who's looking at their applications and things like that, and she'll determine whether or not they're going to come into the program on a run watch, mm-hmm. because oftentimes they have not met with their actual clinician that they're going to be working with at that point in time.
So that, to me, I hear that, and I feel like that even would evoke even more anxiety, just have someone who's constantly on you and constantly ready to touch you and ready to chase you if you were to decide to run away. Like that even seems more anxiety provoking. So what's the therapeutic purpose of that?
Well, it is for half. It's like half of them really hate it. Like adolescent boys really hate it. Yeah. Like they don't like someone being right next to them all the time.
Right.
And then there's many of them that really actually find it supportive. Like they might say they don't like it, but they really do. They don't connect well with the other students, but they connect really well with the guides. Like they feel safe around the guides. So a lot of times, like they'll do things to even stay on it because like they like having that safety net of someone's always there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, every student's an individual in terms of how they react to something like that.
Right.
Some of them fucking hate it. Yeah, and it's hard as a guide.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, I'm not going to go anywhere, and I can't go anywhere because I'm legally obligated to be next to you right now.
Right.
And even if they say they're like, like fuck you, like get away from me. Why are you following me? Don't follow me. Don't follow me. It's like you just got to stay with it.
You have to stay.
Follow them or be next to them. Yeah.
And so you were in that role for a period of time as a tagger, or what would you call it?
No, it was a shared responsibility among the guides. So let's say, for example, we might have a group of 7 students, and we had one on a high safety watch. So that would be a shared responsibility of like, hey, I'm going to tag out because I'm going to like take a break, or I need to go in my backpack over here. Will you tag in? And then it was this kind of a rotating thing. Okay. Yeah. So any guide.
And so what else were your duties as a guide when you were actually on the retreats?
Number one thing was their physical safety, like keeping charge of the physical safety, and like being on like a high safety watch would be part of that. So they would like actually caring for them and like not hurting themselves. Like they're not often like maybe they're finding like a stick and they're rubbing their arm, or they're looking at like a cliff or something like that, and like keeping them away from that. Also involves like if it's raining out, like I'm in charge of their safety. So let's get our rain jackets on. If it's really cold out, it's like we're gonna stop here and we're gonna like get our hands and feet warm before we continue to hike. Or I'm gonna make the decision that like, you know what, we're not gonna hike into this canyon right now. It's too late. It's getting dark, and everyone's like, it's actually better just to stay up here. So it's risk management. The number one piece of our program is stabilizing them, and like. Their parents are paying for the experience of knowing oftentimes that they're safe because they don't feel like their kids are safe at home. They're taking their car and they're leaving all night. The parents know that they're doing Xanax and they can't do they can't do it when they're there. And so it's like a feeling of like relief of like we have them. Like they are going to be safe if they're in this program. Right. That's our first and number one job. If we do only that is we did a good week of wilderness therapy.
For the kids who are enrolled in these programs, how long are they out in the wilderness for?
Depends on the student. We don't have a set program length for them. It depends on the clinician and the clinician assessment of them and the family too. The family can take out an adolescent when they want. I would say the average length of stay is I think it's like 70 days, so it's somewhere between 10 and 12 weeks is the average length of stay for them.
Non-stop.
Non-stop.
Wow.
They're out there for that long.
And you're camping.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
When I had heard about wilderness therapy before, I'd heard that the kids have to be individually responsible for their own survival in terms of acquiring and preparing food for themselves, building their shelter. Is that true?
We want to empower them to do those things, but I am responsible for their safety.
Okay.
Like guides are the ones responsible for their safety because some of them will not act in their own best interest.
I had the wrong idea then. I thought that they had to sort of fend for themselves out there and be nearly on like the brink of death and manage through the elements all alone. But it's really not that at all.
No,
Okay.
They're very like we take a lot of time like coaching them and oftentimes like doing things for them if they're not going to do it for themselves. A lot of them had a suicide attempt just before they came in, or they have like a really strong addiction, or they've never spent time outside before. Like they have no idea how to handle themselves in February in Utah.
Right.
Like they just don't know how to do that. So we have to coach them. There's a lot of coaching and empowering them. The goal is for them, their self-care is therapeutic to them. Eating the right amount, brushing their teeth every day, getting up. These are all ways that they are practicing caring for themselves, and it's becoming a feedback loop. I brush my teeth because like I care how my teeth look. They may not think that, but their behavior is reinforcing that idea.
That was going to be my next question, is like, what is in fact the therapeutic effect of these trips with these kids? Is it the just day in, day out survival? Is it the being in nature? Are they getting therapy while they're out there as well?
So there's 4 reasons why, like we say, like why does this program exist? Like why does any wilderness therapy program exist? So there's 4 reasons why wilderness works, that we call them. So like why you might do wilderness therapy as opposed to like an inpatient clinic or once a week talk therapy with someone. Why bother doing this? So one of the the first reason is like tribe that they have out there. So they are also in community with other age group, their population, and they're learning from each other. And it's a learning, like we promote an environment of like emotional safety, of physical safety, and for them to, in a safe way, like express what they're feeling. And that is healing. Just connection and relationship is healing for them. Oftentimes they're really isolated in their lives, or they don't know how to relate to people.
Right.
And they get angry or they pretend like I don't like people anyway, but they're really lonely.
Yeah.
And so it's connection is a big one in that. Another one is just wilderness. Like the nature is healing for them. It's taking them out of environment of either like overstimulation of games and drugs and internet and distraction and stress, and bringing them into an environment of what would be the word, like harmony in a way. It brings them to more direct experience of their immediate experience in life. Right. It's cold. It can be cold when it rains, or it's wet when it rains. It feels good to be next to a fire. When they wake up in the middle of the night and they get to look up and they see hundreds of stars up in the middle of the night, or they just see a sunset and they see beauty, like that is healing. Those slower patterns are healing to any human.
Yes.
And I think that does a lot of the work. Like as a guide, I like to think that I do a lot of that.
Yeah.
But a lot of the healing is done without me. Just them being out there stabilizes them in a huge way.
So it's the second.
That's the second. Third is task completion. And we touched on that a minute ago. Task completion is the idea that there is a momentum that is built from them continuing to do tasks. So, for example, maybe a day in the life of one of these students might be wake up like at 11 on a Saturday, lie around, maybe smoke pot, watch YouTube for a long time, eat, really just kind of like lie around.
Yes.
Task completion is the idea that like I got up this morning, I cleaned up my things, I ate breakfast, I brushed my teeth, I packed my bag, I hiked for 3 miles today, I unpacked my bag, I built a shelter. I built my bed. We made dinner together. I ate it, I cleaned up, and I'm going to bed. This like idea of stringing all these things together that they start to feel good about themselves. Like, I did that today. I actually hiked 3 miles. And there's a feeling of like, I'm tired, but it's a good tired.
Yes, I have a self-competency growing out of this. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's excellent. And what's the fourth?
Therapeutic relationship is the third. So that's the relationship with their clinician, like the individual relationship they have.
And the clinicians are walking in and out for special meetings.
The clinicians will be there once a week.
Okay.
So, so the students will meet with their clinician. Like, we meet with them on Tuesday, for example, and so they'll meet with them for like an hour, anywhere between an hour and a half, and that can look like them talking about their week with a guide. Like, each week the clinician meets with them, they kind of set a program for the next week of like, hey, you're just landing in the group, so what I want your task to be is I want you to share something over dinner about your life. I want you to tell a story about your life over dinner. I want you to find 3 things in common with every single person in the group. I want you to get a coal this week from bow drilling, which is like a practice we use out there to get fire. They basically blow up a coal from two pieces of wood, essentially, in a bow. The student that's been there a little bit longer, it might be like, your goal this week is to finish your letter of responsibility. And the letter of responsibility is like, that's actually a whole lot of what we practice here. It's saying everything. You're taking ownership for everything that you did. I used to sneak out. I used to steal your car at night. And I used to, like, I told you I never smoked pot, but I actually smoked a lot of pot. Or like that one, you didn't know who broke the lamp. It was me. I broke the lamp. So they're doing honest assessment between their parents and themselves. Like, they're clearing a whole bunch of stuff.
Is there any future planning towards the end where they try to implement, their newfound skills into their life going back home?
Yeah, there is. A lot of the people that come into the program, it is one step. It can be the initial step in a much longer process for them. So wilderness might last anywhere between like 10 to 12 weeks, but they might be in some kind of therapeutic container for a year or 2 years after that. They might go to a therapeutic boarding school after that. So for a container that helps keep these changes in line. Some of them are approved to go home. Some of the times the parents just want them back home. Sometimes that works out well, where they can go back in, and like the family system has been resolved such that they can be planted in a good garden at home. Most times they go back to home and they just go right back to their patterns again. Wilderness is, I think the experience of wilderness opens doors for students, but it's not a magic bullet. If they go back where they were, they will fall on their face.
So would, as you as a former guide, recommend for them to avoid that?
Well, I have to be careful here because I wouldn't make that recommendation as a guide.
Yeah.
That's a clinical recommendation for them to make.
Yeah.
So I don't comment at all, or like I don't have like enough knowledge to have an opinion on their aftercare about this.
Okay.
And so aftercare programs can take a variety of forms. Like I said, it could look like a therapeutic boarding school. I would categorize like the catch-all term aftercare program as a container where they can continue to take advantages of the changes they made in wilderness.
So as long as there is aftercare.
Yes, it supports them in continuing on their trajectory.
They can't just go home and have that as an isolated experience and expect it to stay with them. Well, that's kind of sad, because I was listening to, the 4, what would you call it, the principles, or what are they called? The 4
reasons why wilderness works.
Okay.
More beautiful turn of the phrase.
Yeah. And I found myself getting really excited, like, oh my gosh, this sounds so infallible, but in fact it's not that way at all, and they need more intervention afterwards in other forms in order for it to really stick.
Yes, and I think that those principles work so long as those principles are being practiced. So we can get a huge amount of healing by being in nature, but if we go back to the way that we were, we no longer receive that healing. So like the analogy of like the garden, for example, like the wilderness is a great garden for them to like blossom in many ways. Like they're eating good food, they're getting a lot of sleep, like they're taking care of themselves, they're safe, they have a routine, there's stability, there's emotional safety. And I think once students leave that container, it can be like building a garden, and then like you don't want to water it anymore, or there's not enough nutrients in the soil for them to really take off.
And you don't trust them enough to be able to carry that momentum on their own in terms of...
Yeah, it comes down to individual students.
Yeah.
The numbers don't really back the statistics don't back up that people can leave that kind of environment, go back to the old environment and take root.
Right. What about family intervention? Are the parents brought in and also taught how to relate to their child once the child returns back home, and are they included in the intervention?
Great question. The program that I work for does include family, which makes it unique among some of the other wilderness programs. So family members come in, like they get education on like the forms that we use out there. Like we use like a I feel form, which is communicating emotion, like and in a way that doesn't attach a lot of story to it. And the parents can also come in for a thing called a wellness weekend. It's a weekend at like the office in Durango, where they get education on basically getting in touch with their emotions. And I haven't been to one, so I don't know specifically what they do there, but they work directly with the family. They're also getting their own parallel education with the student.
Yes.
And one other thing that we do there is called a family quest, where generally at the end of their stay, sometimes during the mid part of their stay, the parents and siblings potentially will come in to base camp for a weekend or 2 days and work with the therapist and the student. And then they all spend a weekend together working on their dynamics out there.
And learn how to communicate.
Yes.
What kind of transformations did you see while you were there? I mean, I know that's a huge question. You were there for 4 years, but could you say you saw a general pattern?
Yeah, and again, it's on the level of the student, so it's really up to their motivations, whether or not they want to change. Like they can stay stuck if they want to stay stuck, and I've seen that. The general pattern is that like once I see students leave, like their face changes. They're more expressive in their face. I generally find them to be their affect is brighter.
Right.
They're able to more directly communicate what they're feeling. There's a stability that comes with them too, where they're able to self-regulate. Like self-regulation is a skill. So, for example, you might have a student come in and this student is getting like, you annoy me, like I'm annoyed by you, and then goes off and sits in a corner and just covers up and like stays stuck in there. And one of the things we teach them is like regulation skills of like feeling annoyed. So what can you do right now? Like, can you take, we have some practices like a 3-fold breath, like that's like a breathing exercise we do. Can you use, like communicate who you're annoyed with? That's another like self-regulating thing. So they regulate in a way that doesn't sabotage them, either by pulling away or by exploding in anger. They can begin to take care of themselves in a way that's resourceful.
Did you ever see anyone try to commit suicide while they were on the retreat?
No, I haven't seen anyone actually really try and kill themselves. No. There's been like, I would say like attention getters, like a student putting a cord around his neck and squeezing it. I never felt like the student was really in danger, like of himself. Like we were right next to them, so there was something about like, there's no way you're going to be able to finish this. Like we're right here. So like they couldn't follow through with that. I've had students tell me about like, hey, I don't trust myself right now. Like I'm planning on like jumping off this cliff. Like that is what I want to do. And so we're evaluating them of like, do they have a clear idea of what they want to do? Are they serious about it? Are they coming to us for help? And so they're like, we might keep them away from a cliff or something like that. But that happens out there in some programs, like students. There have been students that have died in some wilderness programs.
Have?
Yes, yeah.
Oh my God. Because
very
they
unusual, very rare, but that has happened. Yeah.
Due to lack of diligence on behalf of the
I can't
guides?
name like
Not sure.
they go into pretty big investigations on this stuff, so I don't know specifically with which ones, but there have been. I know in the past there have been experiences of like a student was taking a shower and maybe the guy didn't hear the student calling their name or something like that, and like in another program, and the student was able to hang themselves while they were out there. And like I want to preface that by saying that statistically speaking, students are way more safe in the wilderness environment than they would ever be at home.
Right.
Sometimes I'm like walking around a town and I see like 15 and 16-year-olds like running around downtown or like driving around. I'm like, they are unsupervised. This is crazy. Like, what are they doing? Someone's got to watch them. Oh. And I think about some of the students I see and how on top of supervision we are with them. Yeah. They can't have conversations out of like our earshot ever. Like they can talk amongst themselves, but we have to hear what they're saying. So it's down to a big level of supervising. Like if they're going to go and use the bathroom, I have to hear them calling their name just to make sure that they're there. Until a certain level of trust is built. Like until they move through a certain level of the program and they don't have to do that anymore. But that takes time. That takes like 8 weeks before they can do that.
And what was the general age range of the kids?
Most kids were between 15 and 17, and then adults were like 18 to 22, and then there were outliers on either side of that. 14 occasionally, and then I would say some of the adult groups I've worked with a student as old as 29, and then some students are like 25, 26, something like that.
And so generally, after all your experience, you're a huge advocate of wilderness therapy and its effectiveness?
I've seen it work. Yeah, I've seen it get big results. It's hard for me to say because I was never a student in the program, so I don't quite know their experience of it. But I do know that time and time again, I've seen a student come in who is miserable and disconnected or really angry, and their life isn't working. Like their life isn't working anymore. And then months later or years later, we've heard back from them and they're doing really well. They're like established and happy and their life is going in a good direction. So yeah, I mean, it does work. I would be an advocate for it.
Yeah. How is it for you being a guide? How long were your shifts?
I worked a little over a week at a time. So I would come into work at 8 a.m. on Wednesday, and then I would get out of work like 6 p.m. on the following Wednesday.
And so I'm guessing you guys were trained at self-care and how to ensure that you yourselves didn't get burnt out and were able to remain alert. And
no, we were not trained on that. That's something that that's on the job training, because everyone's going to approach is different. And so what's so fascinating about working in wilderness is individually our work shows up. Like my work as a guide comes up when I'm in wilderness. So one of the advantages of wilderness for the clinicians is that it's really hard to hide. So I'm with someone for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Oftentimes when it's really cold or it's really hot or we're tired or we want some water or we're hungry or we're really triggered by other students or students are triggered by them. So you can't fake it. The real person comes out. At some point in time, some people can hold on for a couple weeks, but sooner or later the explosion comes. Like maybe they say something, but it's really sideways in the way that they say it. It comes out like passive, or they just break down on a hike. Like, I just can't do it anymore, and they can put on the nice face for a little while. It's like that with guides too. Same thing will happen. Of like, so that's like all its own unique education, and that's done like guide by guide by guide. There's no school of how to be a wilderness therapy field guide. Like, there's no classes to pass. It's all done word of mouth. It's all done by like the lineage of guides teaching guides. So that is a skill as a senior guide that I would teach them, of like, hey, making sure that like we want to advocate. If you want to take a break, I would schedule breaks for them. I would check in with my guide team, and I would give them feedback when I would see something that like, hey, I'm noticing that there's students kind of all over the place right now. Like, make sure we get them all in one spot. If you're feeling like it's too much to handle, like just like strategically put them in one spot so you're looking at all of them at the same time. Or hey, I noticed that your tone of voice with this student is different than the other students. So like, what's going on between you and this student right now? And getting them to see some of that. And it's not for everyone either.
So how exhausting would you say it is to be a guide?
It can be very exhausting to be a guide. I got very exhausted being a guide. There are weeks that were great, where I would leave feeling like clarity and feeling like, oh, I missed that team, and that was like a great week. Like, I'm really proud of the stuff we did in there. And then there are weeks of like, I cannot wait to leave. I cannot wait to leave, and I wasn't looking forward to going back.
Right.
And there's this thing around like of attachment of those things just come and go. Like that's just part of the job. And in wilderness, I think it's part of every job.
Yeah.
But in wilderness, there's a like it's more of like a furnace for those things of like the weeks that were good were really good, and the weeks that were hard were really hard. But those experiences are happening to me all the time in any job I do. I just feel them less intensely. So I would go through a period of like really enjoying being a guide, and then I might go through like a month and a half stretch of like, is this what I want to do? Is this like, should I do this? But if I stayed with it, I would get through that phase, and I would hit like another plateau of like, I really like this. This is going really well. I'm learning new things. I'm getting better at this. And then the wall comes again, and then it's staying with it, staying with it, staying with it. Oh, I'm over that wall again.
Would you say, what kind of therapeutic skills did you learn as a non-therapist?
Oh man, yeah, I learned a lot of skills while I was out there. I find that it's like, being a field guide is, we're not therapists in any way, so we're not like necessarily trained in any kind of therapeutics. We don't bring students into trauma or something like that. We don't like facilitate like them going into the past and looking at that. It's like way beyond what our skill set is. And a lot of like therapeutics we do are like what I talked about earlier, like students self-caring for themselves. That's so huge. That is so therapeutic for them, just to care about themselves. Is like, that's the work for them. But more directly, like I learned how to see maybe a correlation between how they're speaking and how they're acting.
Tell me more about that.
So a student might be like, oh yeah, no, I'm fine. Like I'm not angry with anyone in the group, and then kind of storm off and like isolate themselves, or oftentimes the anger will come out in other ways, like they resent other students, or they'll be passive in their communication with other students. So it's like noticing like, hey, and a whole lot of times, and this actually with a lot of like boys, it's like they don't even know they're angry, or they don't even know they're sad. They just like sometimes we have to tell them like, you're sad right now. Like you are sad. Like this is what's happening. Like you are sad. Like I'm not going to try and convince you. And they have to put their awareness together, because they don't have have the pieces yet of knowing that like when I storm off, I'm really pissed off, or when actually like I didn't do like the chore I was assigned to today because I'm spiting this other student. Like the anger come out in different ways. Another piece of that is like communication. How are they communicating among one another? So I can start to pick up patterns of like, oh, actually you're like, look at like you're bullying this student over here. You're like making these. You're not speaking directly with them. Like they might be making fun of them. They might be. This student might say a comment, and then there's a lot of sarcasm from the other students, or eye rolling or snickering among themselves. Now there's not safety in the group happening.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So that's a big one of like knowing like the larger group dynamic of what's happening.
And how big are the groups of kids going out on these trips?
Anywhere. Well, I mean, the max, we max it at like 11 or 12 would be the max. Average is like 8. And that's what you want. I would want a group around like between 6 and 8, because there's enough dynamics so that things are happening.
Yes.
If it's just 3 students, then it can feel a little stale sometimes.
And how many guides are on the scene?
By state law, we have to be 1 guide to every 4 students. Our company runs 1 guide to every 3 students.
So I'm just amazing myself right now thinking about the constant vigilance needed for this job. And I'm imagining just how exhausting it is. And I imagine you're also woken up in the middle of the night oftentimes as well.
Yeah, we if it's an adolescent team, then we do night checks at 2. One guide's responsible for doing night checks every night at 2:30 in the middle of the night. And that's to like, if we don't find them, then we know they've only been gone for so long. Like they could have only had 3 hours because we saw them before they went to bed.
Right.
Or if we find them gone in the morning, they run away in the morning, we know they were there at 2:30. So.
Did that ever happen? Students missing from beds?
Not often, but that does happen. we take at night for adolescents, we take their shoes and their rain pants, so they have everything they need to be warm for the night, but they don't have materials that they could leave from
Comfortably, at least.
comfortably.
Yes.
Like students have run away in socks before if they're so motivated to do something like that.
And you just literally have to run after them on foot.
Every situation's different, so during the winter time, it's very unusual for a student to run. We're pretty far out there and it's cold, and so they don't. They're like, I'm not doing that. Summer is the time that we get the most runs because it's the most comfortable outside. So
I'm guessing that guides also were also communicating amongst each other who they thought were risks for runaways and things like that.
And then there's also a run watch that we have too, which is similar to a high safety watch. If there's maybe the student is not indicating any kind of like they're not going to harm themselves in some way, but they've talked about like running away, or they maybe had an attempt before, like they'll be an arm's length of the guide at all times.
Even at night.
Even at night, guide will sleep right next to them and actually
Wow.
put a tarp over them and sleep on top of the tarp.
Yeah, I'm still amazed at just the vigilance piece.
Yeah, it's a
Needed.
huge amount of vigilance, huge amount of supervision, and it's a lot about paying attention. Paying attention.
Yeah, paying attention to dynamics, body language, tones of voice, facial expressions all the time.
Yeah, we're paid to like observe.
How much are you paid? Is it well paid?
Yeah, I mean, depending on how long you're there, some people make a career out of it or have made a career out of it for a long time. It depends on the company, but I would say like, yeah, if I were to work all the time, like probably over 40 a year you could make being a guide.
And you would have a shift on a week, and then how long would your break be?
I would be off from Wednesday night to the following Wednesday at 8 a.m. So I'd have Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday off.
Okay, so how far out in the wilderness are you actually with the group?
Well, I think wilderness, as this is defined, is like an hour from the front country. Like wilderness medicine would be 1 hour from secondary care. So that might be like I'm at least 1 hour from a hospital. In Utah, where we are for most of the year, like we were about a 30-minute drive from like a town. And then if they're out in canyons, then it might be like they might be a couple mile hike from a road, which is a 30-minute drive from base camp. So often, if there was a serious emergency, it would need to be a helicopter.
Right.
In Colorado, we are closer to civilization. Oftentimes we see people when we're out there.
And so does the program that you work for, the organization, I guess they have a very close relationship with the nearby hospital who are aware of the program and kind of have the awareness of needing to be on notice or on alert? And do you have those kinds of connections?
Man, there are rarely times when we actually need to like take a student to the hospital. Like I think there might have been a couple times when it was like actually necessary. Like maybe students like saying their back really hurts or something like that. So we're like, all right, let's take them in. Or there might be like, is this an infection? Like they might have,
I see.
or like a pre-existing condition oftentimes. But most of the times, like they're all pretty healthy, and we can treat everything when we're out there. We have a full medical team that's out there. There's a field medic too, so they check students each week, like ask them how they're doing, look over everything. If there's any kind of issues while they're out there, the field medic works underneath the umbrella of a doctor in town, so we stay really on top of stuff when we're out there and make sure it doesn't get bigger than it needs to be.
What would you say, if there are any faults with wilderness therapy?
I have to think about that. Sometimes I have personal reservations. Oftentimes we work with an unwilling population, so they might get woken up at like 2 a.m. with transporters there, being like, pack your stuff, you're getting on a plane and you're going to go out to Utah. Yeah, so they might not be willing to come at all.
Oh my goodness, so some kids are forced to do it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like it is like since they're under their parents' care, their parents make the decision for them that you're going to go to wilderness. So it can be hard to work with an unwilling population. Just personally, for me, it's hard. Sometimes I see the same patterns in the students over and over. Where there's just a lot of resentment they have for their parents for like breaking that trust and like sending them out to the field, and it could take them a long time to like land in the program. And I don't think it's necessary for every student, but it is necessary for some. Of it's like this kid's like might kill themselves either through their own volition or through doing something that is high risk, like if they're an addict in any way, and the parents are like very reasonably fearing for the safety of their life. In those instances, I feel it's justified to I guess like involuntarily take a student into that program.
Right. Dealing with addicts, I imagine, is a whole other ballgame as well, because you're dealing with, the withdrawals and their cravings and the madness that would ensue because they don't have access to their substances anymore. How did you learn to deal with that?
If they, there's a couple, if they're on benzos, so that would be like Xanax, Vicodin, like Oxy, those substances. We have a psychiatrist on staff, and he would give them a taper because they can actually, like alcohol and benzodiazepine can kill people if they withdraw off those drugs, if they don't have them. In the form of like benzo, they will taper off that, so they're actually given some of those, and like we administer medication to them, so they are like safely, and we take their blood pressure and like really monitor them.
Why don't more adults do wilderness therapies?
I don't know that there is a wilderness program that caters to that population. And another piece is like wilderness is expensive. It's a huge operation to do it, even though what the students are seeing is like we're not eating gourmet meals and we're cooking on a fire and I live outside. How come my parents have to pay so much money to do this? So I would think cost is prohibitive. I mean, an average stay of like where I work, the first 5 weeks is like $22,000 or something, and it's almost like college education.
For each participant?
Yeah. That's for 5 weeks. So a full stay with a student and with like a family quest or something like that might look like, it might look like almost $40,000.
Oh my God.
And I think that would be, my initial response was, wow, that's really expensive. And then I add up the cost of putting together a program like this, and I'm kind of surprised it's not a little bit more. You're paying for the psychologists, or excuse me, the clinicians, so one for every team, the clinicians, all the time of the field guides supervising around the clock, all the vehicles, permits, land use, staffing, gas, gear. I think it's like, there's probably 150 employees, the company I work for, and so it's probably like almost like 4 employees to every student. It's not an easy thing to build.
Is there any government funding?
We have like a fund that may help parents without that kind of money. It doesn't happen often. So I would say like here's going back to one of your earlier questions around like what are my problems with wilderness. Oftentimes the kids that need it the most can't afford it. So there's like it's prohibitive, the cost to a lot of people. Insurance may begin to start covering wilderness, which would be a game changer if wilderness was covered underneath insurance. But that's not true of all programs.
Right.
So a lot of it's out of pocket for parents.
Is it common for kids to return to wilderness?
It's not uncommon. It's
really?
not uncommon. Yeah, I see a lot of students. Sometimes a student will graduate, and I see them 3 months later, and they didn't do well at their aftercare, or they made a poor decision or made multiple poor decisions when they left. Sometimes students, and it's like true of myself and all of us, of like there's not enough pain yet to change behavior. For example, a student might be dealing drugs in high school and they get all kinds of validation. They get like money, they're like cool, they're popular, and then they get sent to wilderness and they're like, I don't want to give that up. Like, fuck that. I'm going to go do it when I go home. Like, nothing bad happened to me. And then maybe after they do that, they get arrested, or they get like, or maybe one of their friend dies doing it. And then oftentimes when they come in, when I see adults, there's more motivation to change, because it's like, I can't do that anymore. Like, I'm actually ready to change, where some adolescents are just like, no, I'm not ready to change. And what can you do?
So one of my final questions is, what do you think are the best needed qualities of a guide for the guide to be a good one?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. The big one is grit. That's like the number one quality, is grit. I think that in that kind of job, like, ability of doing that job well is like it's forged for people while they're out there. Like, they will be challenged when they're out there. They will fail. They will feel tired. They will feel overwhelmed. And the guide's ability to handle that and keep going is the difference between guides that stay and become good guides and guides that it's not a fit for. So grit is the number one. Like, are you willing to go through the hard things and learn this? Because it's hard for students and it's hard for guides too. It's intense.
Do you have to undergo psychological evaluation before you become a guide?
There's a lot of vetting that happens beforehand. I mean, there's the application process. Like, there's a lot of interviews and like vetting that happens in the interviews. There's background checks and stuff. There's no psychological application. In the training process, we would catch, generally, for the most part, we would catch if someone wouldn't be a fit as a guide.
Right.
And that might look like not owning what they're expressing, reacting to other people, things of that nature.
So you have to be very stable emotionally.
You have to be stable, yeah. You have to be really stable. Like, emotional stability is a big one. Like grit, emotional stability, willingness to learn, willingness to learn the hard skills. So if they don't have a lot of willingness background, willingness to learn how to pack a pack, how to dress properly outside, how to tie up a shelter, how to learn all the knots, how to know how to navigate and read a map and compass, those things. And then also the soft skills. Like the soft skills being
a people person.
Yeah, liking people. Liking people is a big one, but there's also all kinds of other skills that we learn, like de-escalation techniques. So first, if someone's really angry, how do we actually bring them out of anger before maybe they act in a way that's unsafe? Building rapport and connection is another big one. So mirroring and matching, like they're kind of, it's described as like little like Jedi mind tricks that we do, that we all actually implement subconsciously all the time, but we are taught them consciously of how to do them.
So for mirroring, you're taught to do that in order to provoke a liking to you on behalf of the student? Or to facilitate
the reason
them?
that you would like, quote, mirror or match is a way in which to build connection. So for example, I'm not mirroring you, but I'm matching you right now. We both have our arms back right now, and it's an unconscious behavior that we will all do. Once we feel in connection with someone, we will we begin to like imitate one another. Consciously using those skills can help build connection. So for example, I might notice the way that you talk, and I might notice you say a certain word, and then I start saying that word, so that you start to be like, this person's like me. I like this person now.
Interesting.
Right? Or another example of like mirror and matching, if there's a student that is shut down, and they have their arms crossed over their legs, and they're kind of in a little ball, I'm not going to come up to them all happy and be like, hey, how you doing? Like, that would be so disconnected from their experience. So what I might do is I might sit next to them and kind of maybe even do the same thing that they're doing, or maybe just slightly different. And I might just say nothing and hang out with them for a long time before I speak to them. And in that way, I'm unconsciously meeting them in that way of like, this person's not here to change my mind. They're not here to do anything, but like, they're just hanging out too, and they might be much more willing to communicate with me.
Can you talk more about the de-escalating tactics?
So de-escalating, we learned a system called Aegis system. So de-escalating is again, it's like meeting them where they are and bringing them out. So if they, if you were really angry, like screaming at the top of your lungs, like, I don't like you, or like, I hate this place, I hate this place, I hate this place. What would make someone more mad is someone in a calm voice saying, calm down, calm down. Like, I would feel so unheard and angry at them. Often what happens when people are, let's say, in an escalated state, is they are no longer acting in the prefrontal cortex of the brain. They're no longer responding to reason is not in the, they're responding like they're in their reptilian brain.
Yes.
And so they're acting in terms of like, what is safe, what is not safe. And so they're evaluating the world through their limbic system at that time. So reasoning is out the window. You don't de-escalate someone through reason when they're that high. So it's like, if someone is up here on the scale of anger, I would bring myself up there, meet them up there, and then we would both come down together.
So you would start shouting yourself?
Yeah, I may say something, and it doesn't even make sense sometimes. So they might say, like, they might be really angry, like they might be saying like, fuck this place, I hate this place, fuck this place. And I would be like, yeah, this place fucking sucks. Like, just like they said it, right? And sometimes it gets like a startling response, but in that moment, they feel heard. Like, they feel matched, that like, I get that they are pissed. And then they feel heard in that way. So, I mean, I could walk you through a couple exercises of like, I'm not allowing you to resist what I'm doing. Like, if you were to say the food sucks, instead of being like, no, it doesn't, I might be like, yeah, like the food actually does suck here. And then it's like, it's not giving you something to push on anymore. And when you feel heard, there's a relaxation that occurs.
Well, thank you so much for being such a generous interviewee.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I'm just that fucking dog.